My wife cheated on me with a 22-year-old boy while I worked tirelessly to support the house and our future. But when I finally saw the incriminating messages and my own daughters eventually confessed their knowledge, I prepared a meticulous revenge that ruined everything for her. My name is Carlos. I am 52 years old, and I am a successful entrepreneur in the educational technology sector. I built my entire life from absolute scratch. I started by selling humble brochures in college, and today I proudly own a massive company with almost 5,000 employees. Julieta, my wife, is 46 years old and works as a high-level human resources manager at a prominent multinational company. We met back in college, and I always genuinely thought we were that rare, blessed type of couple that actually grows old together. We had 3 wonderful daughters: Laura, 24 years old, Isabella, 21, and Manu, 18. For years, I was that dedicated guy who did absolutely everything for them. I never once thought that inside my own house, I would experience the greatest and most gut-wrenching humiliation of my life. The message came on a random, quiet night while I was still at the office finishing some urgent reports. It was from an unknown number with no profile picture. The person stated she was the jilted girlfriend of a boy named Rafael and warned me that he was having a sordid affair with Julieta from the Human Resources Department. At that moment, I thought it was some kind of bizarre mistake or a stupid, cruel joke, but she seemed to know far too much. She sent specific dates and Instagram photos of events that coincided perfectly with my business trips. Even the name of a coworker of Julieta's was mentioned, someone I only knew because she had been at our house for a single dinner years ago. It all sounded terribly, hauntingly right. The most devastating thing was seeing the name of the place where it all began, a luxury hotel in the city center that I had personally booked for a national convention of my company. I had spent months organizing every detail, leaving everything in trustworthy hands to undertake this essential business trip. And it was precisely my absence, planned with such meticulous care, that opened the way for the betrayal to occur. It was as if, in some cruel and twisted way, all my hard work and effort had been rewarded with a sharp stab in the back. In the following days, I went through a kind of emotional lethargy. Pretending to be normal and happy has become an almost surreal and exhausting task. I looked at Julieta and thought, how could she smile at me after all she's done? How could she still wish me a good morning with those lying lips? How could she ask me to pick up the bread at the bakery on Sundays? What hurt me the most was the sheer coldness, the level of calculation it required. It was not a sudden impulse or a one-night mistake. It was a plan. It was a plan built on the sacred trust of a husband who never denied her anything, who was always there, present, and taking care of everything. I did not say anything to anyone at that first agonizing moment. I spent days mentally reviewing all the trips, all the dinners she said she had had with company colleagues, and all the meetings at strange hours. Each memory brought with it a fresh pang of humiliation. I saw myself hugging her in family photos, celebrating birthdays while she was already living another dark reality. The pain was absurd and overwhelming. I felt like a pathetic clown, the last person to know, the kind of man that, even with everything he built, was still not enough. The loop started there because the more I investigated, the more I realized things that I had previously ignored, and the absolute worst was yet to come. Although this betrayal had torn me apart inside, I did not know that the most painful blow would not come from her, but from the 3 people I loved most in the entire world. I will never forget it. His name was Rafael, 22 years old, a marketing intern at the company where Julieta worked. When I saw the boy's photo on Instagram sent by the same woman who sent me the complaint, I felt a sickening mixture of disgust and disbelief. He looked even younger than he really was. He had that cool look, always wore a cap, and a t-shirt from an indie band that he probably did not even listen to. And there he was with his hand on my wife's waist at a party that until then I did not even know had happened. The caption said, "The best night of my life." It was like getting a physical punch in the stomach. I started to put the pieces together. The party had been the same weekend that I was in Sao Paulo presenting a new line of products to foreign investors. I remember that night, I sent her a message telling her that I missed her. Julieta replied with a heart emoji and said that she was exhausted and was going to sleep early. Now I know that she should have been with him. The contrast between the false tenderness of her words and the raw truth of the images made me vomit in my own bathroom. It was as if every detail was a fresh stab. And it was not just the betrayal itself. It was the theater, the zeal with which she organized everything. Julieta made an alibi for me. While I was presenting my company to executives in a room full of spotlights, she was undressing for a boy who was barely out of his teens. This was not an oversight. It was cold foresight, a meticulously calculated plan to fit into the gaps in my schedule. I felt as if I had slept next to an actress for years without ever knowing the script she was playing. What scared me the most was the boy's age. He was only 4 years older than my youngest daughter, almost the same age as Manu. It awakened something primal and protective within me, not only for the moral aspect, but because it made me see how far apart Julieta and I were. When she started to see me as someone old, predictable, and boring, and when she started to look at boys like him with desire, I felt disgusted. I felt that my bed had become a dirty place. And what is more, that I, without knowing it, had lived with a woman who would have the courage to do something like that in her right mind. Mentally, I reviewed all the time she told me it is okay. All the time she told me thank you for taking care of us. And I, a total idiot, believed every word of it. I thought that the normal wear and tear of a long marriage was normal. After all, 24 years do not pass without scars. But no, she was too bored to resist the freshness of someone who did not even know how to fold a shirt. I provided security and a life of luxury. He gave her excitement, and she chose excitement, even if it meant throwing her whole life in the trash. From that moment on, the hole began to open even wider, because if she had been able to plan all this as well, what else was she hiding from me? I began to look at my own house with suspicion, and it was then that a much crueler truth began to take shape. Still timidly, still in the shadows, but already screaming in the corners of my mind. Did my daughters know? I continued to live with Julieta for another 2 months after the discovery. Not by choice, but by inertia. There was a part of me that was still trying to understand what had happened, as if my brain refused to fully accept the reality. I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, go to the gym, immerse myself in work, and only come back at night exhausted. It was a way to numb the pain and to maintain my routine as a wall so as not to have to face the emotional destruction that was consuming me from within. Every corner of the house seemed to mock me. The sofa where we watched movies as a family was now the same one where I imagined her kissing that boy. The kitchen, where she prepared coffee while I read the news on my tablet, now smelled sour, as if it were impregnated with betrayal. The room became a minefield. I would lie on one side of the bed and remain there staring at the ceiling while she lay on the other side pretending to sleep. There were no more moving moments, no more sincere words, only silence and the creak of the mattress marking the distance between two strangers. The most unbearable pain was the constant simulation. Julieta did not stop smiling in front of the girls, asking how each one's day had been, and even asking me if I wanted the usual dinner. I would answer with grunts or pretend to be busy talking on the phone. It is not that I did not want to scream, to break everything, and to kick her out of the house. It was that I felt paralyzed, as if my spirit had left my body. The man I had been for 24 years, father, husband, provider, was dead, and what was left was a functional body programmed to produce and survive. At work, I managed to keep up appearances there. At least they still respected me. I still controlled something, but on car rides, in silent showers, and in the seconds before going to bed, I would break down in silence. Crying has become a solitary habit, and the worst part is that no one knew. For all intents and purposes, I was the same Carlos as always, the successful entrepreneur, the man who had amassed a fortune and had a perfect family. The irony of the matter gnawed at me. During this period, I began to feel like an extra in my own life. I saw scenes of my family like someone watching an old movie with a script that I already know and hate. He was present, but absent. I attended dinners, but it was as if I saw everything through a thick glass and still without saying a word of what I knew. I began to notice exchanged glances, strange silences, and small gestures that I would not have noticed before. It was then that it dawned on me. Maybe Julieta was not the only one hiding secrets. This possibility began to gnaw at me even more. What if they knew? What would have happened if my own daughters, my girls for whom I sacrificed everything, had been accomplices in this theater? I could not believe it, but the pieces were beginning to fit together. I just was not ready to discover what would come next. I cannot explain the exact moment when I realized that there was something deeply wrong with the girls. Maybe it was the way they avoided looking at me at the table, or the way they would fall silent every time Julieta entered the room. The house was imbued with a different kind of silence. It was not just an inconvenience. It was guilt. I began to observe the three of them more closely, each in their own way. They seemed to carry a heavy weight on their shoulders. Until one day, no longer able to bear it, I called Manu to talk. She was always the most sensitive, the most connected to me. We closed the door to my office at home. All I had to do was ask her calmly if she knew anything for her to completely break down. She fell into my lap, crying and apologizing. She said she did not want to hurt me, that it took her by surprise. She told me everything. She had come home early from school almost 3 years ago and saw her mother kissing Rafael on the living room sofa. She was in a state of shock, frozen on the threshold of the hallway. Julieta, realizing this, ran to her and begged her not to tell me. She said it had been a mistake and that Dad does not need to know. Those words hit me like a knife. Why did she keep it for so long? Why did none of the three tell me anything? Manu explained that after that day, she began to have anxiety attacks. She saw her mother with suspicion, but did not have the courage to confront her, and that little by little, she became convinced that it had been nothing more than an isolated episode. But it was not. The relationship continued, and the worst part is that at some point, the other two also found out and remained silent just like her. The next day, I confronted Isabella and Laura. The reaction was almost identical: crying, guilt, and desperation. Isabella said she heard suspicious conversations and saw messages on her mother's cell phone, but she did not want to separate the family. Laura, the eldest, was direct. I thought you knew, Dad, but you pretended you did not want to see it. That destroyed me, knowing that my own daughter believed that I was so blind or weak as to ignore something so serious. And the worst part, for years they shared this secret as if it were a parallel truth within the home. The pain of knowing about the betrayal was one thing, but their betrayal, that was different because I raised them with love, with sacrifice, giving everything I had. I was present. I paid for private school, college, the exchange program, the best health plan, everything. I never let anything be missing. I worked to exhaustion to guarantee them the best. And in the end, they decided to protect their unfaithful mother instead of telling me. They chose silence, secrecy, and complicity. Since then, I have never seen the house in the same way again. I began to see everything as a facade, a soap opera scene that was slowly crumbling. I felt like the idiot of the family, the man who clung to everything while being deceived, the useful but emotionally disposable provider. And even if they had regretted it, even if they had cried in my arms, the damage was already done. Do you know that type of father who spares no effort? That was me. Not because someone asked me to, but because I wanted to. I grew up watching my father work hard in a mechanic shop and coming back every day smelling of oil and with calloused fingers. I promised myself that I would do it differently. I succeeded. I created a company from scratch without partners, without angel investors, without favors. I want to fight. I woke up before the sun for years, sacrificing vacations, trips, and even birthdays, all in the name of my daughter's future of them. I remember Laura's face when she entered college, Isabella's cry when she boarded the exchange program, Manu's bright eyes when she received her first cell phone. Each of these achievements was the result of my sweat, and I did everything with pleasure. I never threw it in your face. I never asked for gratitude. But now sitting in this same office where I signed so many contracts, where I planned the growth of a company that now employs almost 5,000 people, I can only feel a hole in my chest because all that effort, all that dedication meant nothing at the moment when I most needed protection. It is difficult to explain what it is like to feel betrayed by the person you raised. It is not just sadness. It is a gnawing emptiness, a feeling of having been used. I was the man who guaranteed a roof, food, school, car, medical insurance, trips, and in the end, I was treated as someone disposable, deceived, and silenced. My daughters, the same ones I carried on my shoulders in the park, the ones who slept on my chest when they were afraid of thunder, chose to live a lie. And the worst part, with a terrifying naturalness, there was not a single note, no anonymous attempt to warn me, nothing. I began to wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen another path. What would have happened if I had been one of those absent, cold, distant fathers? Would that have changed anything? Or was I too kind? The anger that grew inside me was silent and cold. It was no longer about that impulsive rebellion. It was something denser, crueler. It was the realization that although I was the foundation of the family, I was invisible as a man, as a person, as a husband, and as a father. I think that was the cruelest point of all, because you can even accept that a marriage ends. But when you realize that your story as a father was built on a theater, then things change. I began to lose my taste for the company itself. What used to make me feel proud, I could no longer walk the halls with the same sparkle. I felt that all that success was a lie, that everything I had built actually had no foundation. It was just a facade, a castle made of smoke. It was in this existential hole that an idea began to emerge, an insistent fantasy to disappear, to leave everything behind. Maybe, just maybe, I could still find some peace where no one knew me. Maybe in some distant place, I could stop being the idiot who financed a play for more than 2 decades. The idea began as a silly fantasy, a thought that invaded me in the minutes before sleep. What if I just disappeared, leave everything behind to settle my accounts, sell my possessions, and head to some forgotten town on the Mexican coast? I imagined the scene in detail. Me walking barefoot on the sand, unshaven, without a phone, without emails, without a past, just the sound of the sea and the smell of grilled fish on the breeze. For the first time in months, that thought made me smile, even if it was a tired smile. Every morning, the fantasy took more shape. I began to research small towns in Mexico. Cimblas, Bacala, Isla, Holbox, cities that meant nothing to me and for that very reason seemed perfect to me. The idea of disappearing became a comfort, almost a prayer. It was not just about running away. It was about freeing myself from the identity that was destroying me. I was no longer Carlos the businessman, Carlos the family man, Carlos, Julieta's husband. I was just a broken man, a man who needed to disappear so as not to go crazy. I spoke with my lawyer. He said he wanted to travel indefinitely. He looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of pity and concern. He said that legally that would be a risk. You have too many assets, stocks, legal liabilities. You cannot just disappear. He told me about the possible blockades, the instability that this would cause the company, the effects on taxes, and even the implications in the divorce process. But the truth is that I barely heard half of it because all of that no longer made sense to me. The money, the possessions, the properties, none of that mattered to me anymore. It was like having a bag of gold inside a burning house. I wanted peace, just that. I began to feel suffocated even by the objects that surrounded me. The luxury car, the big house, the custom-made suit. Everything was a reminder of the character they forced me to live. And the more I thought about that idea, the more distant I felt from people, even from my daughters. They tried to get closer, but there was something broken there that perhaps could never be fixed. I started keeping a passport in my office drawer, just in case, I told myself, but I knew I was getting ready. I started canceling appointments and avoiding meetings. I became a shadow in my own company. I only did not leave for good for one reason. Manu. She, still in shock, began to sleep in the room next door. She was fragile and scared. And although my soul was already miles away, there was something inside me that could not let her go. The escape kept calling me like a constant whisper. I just needed to organize a few things, make sure Manu was safe, and then I would go far from everything. Far from everyone. For the first time in a long time, there was a flame burning inside me. And she said, "Carlos, you can still start over. But first, you will have to burn everything." Even with everything that had happened, there was a part of me that still wanted to understand, to know the reason for the silence, to know why they, my girls, decided to leave me in the dark for so long. I started with Manu. She was the youngest, but also the closest to me. I called her to talk on a Saturday morning. I made some coffee and tried to maintain a calm tone. But the moment I asked her if she had lied to protect me or to protect her mother, she cried. A cry from someone who carries too much weight on their shoulders. Between sobs, she repeated that she did not want to see me suffer, that she was afraid. That Julieta had promised that it would only be once and that it would not happen again, that she believed it. And then when she realized that the romance continued, she felt ashamed. He said that he did not know how to tell me, that he thought that I already knew, and that he was pretending out of pride. He hugged me, apologized so many times that I lost count. It was a confusing moment because no matter how much my heart ached, I still loved her, as if loving someone and feeling deeply disappointed could coexist in the same space. Then I spoke with Isabella. At first, she was more resistant, perhaps out of shame. She tried to justify herself. She tried to defend herself. She said she was not sure, that she only suspected. But when I mentioned the messages that she herself shared with Manu, she broke down in tears. She admitted that she felt divided, that she thought she was protecting her family, avoiding a greater tragedy. "I thought that if we knew everything would end," she said, and she was right. But that did not make the omission any less painful. Laura was the last, the oldest. I expected a more mature and more conscious attitude from her. And in a certain sense, she did. "You did not try to justify yourself." He said he knew. "What did you see? Who understood what was happening and decided not to get involved?" "It was cowardice." "Dad, I know, but I did not know how to face it." That phrase got stuck in my head because that summed it all up. They did not know how to face it. And instead of looking for me, they hid in silence. They let me sink into a reality that everyone knew was a lie except me. I looked at each of them with a weariness that I could no longer hide. He said he still loved them, that this would not change, but I made it clear, our relationship would never be the same again. Trusting them now would require something I did not have, at least not at that moment. They promised me that they wanted to rebuild everything, that they would do anything. But at that moment in history, words no longer had the same weight. I heard it, but I did not feel it. It was as if everything was passing through an emotional filter that blocked any attempt at real reconnection. The truth is that this confrontation affected me deeply. Seeing my daughters there broken, repentant, asking for forgiveness at the same time that I felt betrayed, used, and deceived was a paradox. I love them with all my being, but they also hurt me. How do you rebuild something when the foundations have been broken? How do you trust someone who has blinded you for years? There was no answer at that moment, but one thing was certain. Normality was dead, and what would come next would be something else. Julieta did not see it coming. After everything I discovered, the betrayal, the romance with the boy, the girl's silence, the decision to divorce was like a last vestige of dignity. My lawyer handled everything confidentially. The day the papers were served on her, she froze. We were sitting in the living room. She opened the envelope, read it quickly, and then began to laugh. A nervous, awkward laugh that soon turned into tears. It was the first time in a long time that she seemed genuinely surprised, as if she had believed until the end that I would never have the courage. At first, she did the expected. She cried. She apologized. She swore that she loved me, that it had been a mistake, a slip, a moment of need. She tried to manipulate me with memories of the past, talking about girls, about the difficult nights we faced together, but I had already heard too many excuses. I responded with silence. When she realized that she would not have my forgiveness, her tone changed, and then her true face appeared. The face that only appears when she loses control of the narrative. He began to scream. He accused me of cowardice. He said that I was destroying the family out of pride. Then he began to make threats. He said he would go to the press, that he would tell everyone that I was abusive, that he had videos, that he could ruin my reputation. He even talked about going to the company and spreading lies among my employees, saying that I used company money to pay for prostitutes, that they would cancel me in weeks. It was a storm of dirty, poisonous words, all to try to bind me through fear. But I was no longer the Carlos I used to be. I got up, went to the shelf, grabbed my cell phone, and showed that I was recording from the moment the papers were served. She turned pale. She began to get tangled up in her words, trying to take it back, saying that she was not serious, that it was desperation speaking for her, but it was already too late. I showed everything to my lawyer the next day. He immediately filed for a restraining order and started a lawsuit for attempted blackmail and defamation. For the first time, Julieta was going to face real consequences. What impressed me the most was how quickly the mask fell. Julieta, that woman who for 2 decades pretended to be rational, strong, and thoughtful, revealed herself to be petty, cruel, and desperate for control. She did not cry out of remorse. She was crying because she was losing power, comfort, and the security of having a husband who supported her in everything while she did what she wanted with whomever she wanted. Now she would have to deal with the exposure, with shame, and with the weight of her own decisions. After that, we avoided any kind of direct contact. Everything began to be mediated by lawyers. The divorce process was underway, and I was determined to make sure that she did not destroy anything else, not my business, and certainly not my sanity. But even then, I knew that it was not over yet because Julieta was not the type to ever accept losing in silence. And I still had to protect someone who was much more vulnerable than me. After Julieta's outburst, the house became an emotional battlefield. Manu, the youngest, began to avoid even crossing paths with her mother in the hallways. It was visible. She walked hunched over, quiet, and anxious. She began to sleep with her door locked with headphones on all the time, and she stopped eating properly. One night, she called me to her room and told me with tears in her eyes that she no longer wanted to live there, who could no longer stand the atmosphere, the screams, and the hurtful looks from her mother, and she asked me, "Father, will you take me with you?" It was one of the quickest and most certain decisions I ever made. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment downtown near the preparatory school where she studied. Nothing fancy, but it was a quiet, safe space. In the first few days, she cried a lot. She was afraid that Julieta would do something crazy, afraid of being judged by her sisters, and afraid of having betrayed her own mother by staying by my side. But little by little, with silence, hot food, and genuine security, she began to breathe again. She began to sleep better and even laugh again, albeit timidly. It was like watching a withered flower trying to bloom in the middle of a harsh winter. I hired a psychologist who specializes in family trauma. Manu agreed to do the sessions. At first, it was difficult. She felt guilty for everything, for seeing the betrayal, for not telling me, and for staying by my side. But the therapist explained something to me that moved me deeply. She is trying to be a daughter of 2 worlds that have collapsed at the same time. That would shatter any teenager. It was there that I understood the size of the wound that Julieta had left, not only in me, but also in her. We became a silent, supportive duo. We had breakfast together, sometimes in silence, having lunch on Saturday, and watching a series on TV. Little by little, I was rescuing the daughter I thought I had lost. She thanked me for simple things, for leaving a light on in the hallway, for buying her a cod snack late in the afternoon, for remembering to buy her favorite ice cream. And I would also thank her because she stayed, for giving me a reason not to disappear forever, and for reminding me that despite everything, there was something worth saving. Julieta, of course, was furious. She sent messages saying that I was kidnapping her daughter, that she was going to sue me for parental alienation, but the lawyer took care of everything. There was no legal basis. Manu was 18 years old. She was lucid, and she made it clear in her statement that she wanted to live with me of her own free will. Julieta lost control once again, and that made her even more dangerous. But I kept my distance. The focus now was on Manu and making sure she can get into college in peace. She was the one who made me postpone my plans to disappear. How could I leave her? She was fragile, rebuilding everything. I could not abandon her in the middle of the chaos. I decided I would only leave when she was safe, firm, and ready. When she could walk alone without fear. Until then, I would be her harbor. And who knows, maybe I would also rebuild a little of myself in the process. Julieta tried everything to turn the game around. When she realized she was losing control, she began to call her relatives, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, even a distant cousin who barely spoke to us. She said that I was scared, that I had become an aggressive man, and that I wanted to steal her daughter, but the plan failed because little by little, the truth began to leak out. The story with Raphael, the recorded threats, and the defamation lawsuit. And in the midst of all this, the worst blow came for her. The company itself fired her temporarily, alleging unethical behavior. It was a long few months. During this time, Julieta became a bitter and isolated figure. She tried to give a twist to the story, but no one believed her anymore. Her friends moved away, her reputation in the company collapsed, and the lawsuit my lawyer filed moved forward quickly. Formal charges of emotional blackmail and attempted defamation were accepted. This had direct consequences: freezing of assets, internal investigation within the company, and a total loss of professional credibility. She, who always boasted of being a strong and respected woman, became the subject of whispers in the hallways. Meanwhile, Manu began to flourish. Little by little, she returned to her routine. She began to laugh more often and began to study with real concentration. She began to make plans for college. She said she wanted to study psychology, maybe to help people like her. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt pride without bitterness. We began to go out for lunch on Sundays. We took a short trip to Parody. It was simple, but it was real. It was true. A new beginning, silent, but full of meaning. The other two daughters also sought to get closer. It took them time. There were still wounds, open wounds, but little by little, with honest conversations, tears, and silence, we managed to build some bridges. It is not like it used to be, and it may never be again. But there is respect, regret, and a mutual desire not to let everything die. I made it clear, love remains, but trust is now earned little by little. About my idea of disappearing, it is still alive, but now there is a date. I made a promise to myself. When Manu finishes high school and goes to college, I will take a sabbatical year. I will temporarily end my active participation in the company, delegate responsibilities, and leave. I want to cross Mexico from end to end by car, by boat, by bus, whatever. I want to get lost. I want to find myself again without a cell phone, without a watch, just with a backpack on my back and the certainty that I left everything in order. Today, when I look back, I see a whole life dismantled before my eyes. But I also see a man who in pieces began to rebuild himself. Julieta lost everything because she chose the dirtiest path. I lost a lot of time, peace, and illusions, but I gained something that I did not even know I was looking for, freedom. Maybe in the end this was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. If you provided everything for your family only to find out they were all keeping a secret like this from you for years, would you ever be able to look at your children the same way again? Or is the bond of blood permanently tainted by the silence of betrayal? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments.